Our scripture reading this morning is from the Gospel of Matthew, the 9th chapter. Listen now to what the Spirit is saying to her church this day. While he, Jesus, was saying these things to him, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly, a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned and seeing her said, "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has made you well." And instantly, the woman was made well. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread throughout the district. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Someone asked me how I was doing the other day, and I said, "Fine." They said, "How are you really doing?" And again, I responded, "Fine," not willing to spend the mental energy it would take to generate a real response to that question. The 14th century poet, Hafiz, has a poem that begins, "I have 1,000 brilliant lies for the question, 'How are you?'" Can't we all say that? We're programmed to respond to the question, "How are you?" with "fine." But I would venture to say that no one is fine. Think about the 1,000 brilliant stories living just beneath the surface of that 4-letter lie. How are you? Fine. A soft response hinting at the sadness of heartbreak. To say more than fine would be an invitation for tears to start flowing. How are you? Fine. Biting the nails, fidgeting with your hands, mind preoccupied with an upcoming deadline for school or work, wondering how you'll make it until then. Or the one I got really good at as a teenager, "How are you?" Fine. Trying to convey enough annoyance in those 4 letters that my parents wouldn't ask a follow-up question, even though they really did care about the story beneath the answer. We all have 1,000 brilliant lies for the question, "How are you?" And many of them are contained in those 4 letters, as if by speaking the word "fine," we'll convince ourselves that we really are fine. It's these 4 letters that compelled me to focus on anxiety in the month of September. Anxiety is a reality with which most of us are familiar, regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, you name it. Anxiety is an equal opportunity affliction. And in our world right now, aren't we reminded of that more than ever? Anxiety. The time and energy we give to thoughts about a future that is unknown and out of our control, a preoccupation about what might happen. 2 years ago, studies showed that Americans were most anxious about the ability to keep their families safe, financial security, health, and the impact of politics on daily life. In 2 years, our world has shifted so much that if all of those anxieties were the background music to daily life in our country, noticeable, but controllable. In 2 years, the volume has been turned up to 11 on each of those soundtracks. Now it's unavoidable and just plain loud. Parents are anxious about the decision to send their kids to school or to keep their kids home. Children are anxious about going to school or staying home. College students are anxious about having to snitch on their friends who aren't following the new rules. Older folks are anxious about how much longer they'll have to live in isolation from those they love. The unemployed and underemployed are anxious about whether they'll be able to find work in this economy. The sick are anxious about becoming more sick when they go to the hospital for treatment. And those are just pandemic related. More likely than not, just by being an American citizen, you have some anxiety about the upcoming election. No matter your politics, there is anxiety that a vote for the other party will be the end of this country as we know it. If you weren't anxious already, maybe you are now. This month, our sermon series is titled, "Does This Make You Anxious?" And we'll focus on things that are usually sources of anxiety. My hope is that each week we'll learn something new about how to respond to anxiety thanks to our ancestors of faith. If this was a commercial for medication, this would be the moment where the barely decipherable disclaimer comes at the tail end. I'm not going to rush through my disclaimer quite as quickly, though, because I do want to say this clearly. Anxiety disorders are real. And it should not come as a shock to you that I am not a medical professional. I am not suggesting that these sermons are substitutes for professional help or medication. And if you need professional resources, please reach out to me. I would love to connect you with people who can help you in that way. I am suggesting, though, that your physical and mental health need not be separate from your spiritual health. And I hope that these sermons spark a conversation between the two. We don't have to live in a binary way, separating what happens in our faith lives from the rest of the world. End of disclaimer. 12 years she waited. 4,380 days. On average, Americans spend about 6 months of their lives waiting. 38 hours a year waiting in traffic. 21 minutes waiting on a spouse to get ready every time you leave the house. 32 minutes waiting for the doctor at each appointment. And then there's the other kind of waiting that is harder to measure. Waiting for the test results. Waiting for resolve. Waiting for the grade. Waiting for the one. Oh, we know how to wait. 12 years she waited. 12 years, 24 lifetimes worth of waiting compressed into the life of this one woman. Our scripture doesn't tell us much. Simply, then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak, for she said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." This straightforward sentence pays no mind to the story living just under the surface. The woman began bleeding, as women do when they reach a certain age. Except this woman never stopped bleeding. 12 years of hemorrhaging. Imagine all that lives in those 12 years. The tears, the cramps, the doctor's appointments, the phone calls with the insurance company that doesn't want to cover the claims, the migraines, the medications, the name calling from classmates, the stares from strangers, the shame. This is not the story of a woman who woke up with the resolve to change her life one day. This is the story of a woman who has been brought to her knees and is out of options. 12 years anxiously waiting for a cure. Even if you haven't waited on something for 12 years, don't you know what it's like to wait? Hoping that this time the problem will be solved, this treatment will be the one that works, this year will be the year that you find the right friend group, make the grades, get the promotion. This year, grief will lose its sting. This year, the marriage will get better. When we wait on healing and resolve, whether or not we recognize it, whatever we're waiting on shapes our whole life. It's the murmur in our brains that can't be turned off, the elevator music that is always playing in the background, but on good days, you can ignore it. It's the burden you wish you could hand off to someone else. And we convince ourselves that in the waiting, the anxiety, the dread that accompanies the waiting, all that background music is just a part of life. There's no other way, we tell ourselves. It's just part of the deal. 12 years she waited. Unlike us, this woman didn't have access to modern medicine. She couldn't hop on a plane to South America and visit a shaman or buy the latest miracle drug. She was likely a widow, poor, and deemed unclean and untouchable by her society. But 12 years was enough time to exhaust whatever options were at her disposal. And 12 years was certainly enough time to internalize everything her society told her. It's your problem, not ours. You're an outsider. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps. You don't need help from anyone else to solve this. We may have more options for solving the problems that ail us than the woman did. But I think having so many options is part of the problem. The option to see one more doctor, try one more medication, work just a little bit harder, all of those reinforce the same things that we're told to the woman, that these are our problems to figure out by ourselves. And with the right amount of time and money, anything can be fixed. So we put our heads down, keep our problems to ourselves, wanting to wait until we've figured everything out and can share our success story with the community instead of burdening them with the journey. Do you know what that's like? Waiting for the memory of that painful incident to fade. Waiting for the day that you don't think about the words you wish you could take back. Waiting for the cloud above your head to lift. And thinking all the while that you have to carry these things by yourself. That you need not bother your friends or your family or your faith community with the things that weigh you down. Here's what I know. We all want to believe that we can go it alone and we can do it ourselves. And our society wants us to believe that too. But I also know this: that will not work. One day we will each look up and realize that we have exhausted all of our means trying to do it ourselves, all of our resources, all of our emotional energy, all of our spiritual energy. The hemorrhaging woman had no choice. 12 years she'd waited, and what did she have to lose by crawling through a crowd to touch Jesus? Her plight could not get any worse. But listen to this amazing sentence. After she touches Jesus' cloak, he says, "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has made you well." The more literal translation of that sentence is, "Your faith has rescued you." Your faith has rescued you. What kind of faith has the power to rescue you? I think a faith that you don't have to go it alone. A faith that God will not turn from you no matter what it is you're carrying. A faith that God will not turn you away no matter how long you've been selling yourself the lie that you will figure it out by yourself. A faith that God will meet you where you are, just as you are. That is a faith powerful enough to rescue. She didn't have a choice, but we do. And thanks be to God that we can learn from her example. So I wonder what things you're carrying right now. What are you waiting for? What healing are you waiting on? What relationships have caused you to exhaust your means? What trials have you convinced yourself are yours to face alone? Brothers and sisters, the good news is that you don't have to go it alone. So maybe the better question for us is, what are you reaching for? With nothing to lose, she reached out for his cloak. What are you reaching for? It's when we reach out for God and for one another and face these things in community that healing comes. So bring your anxiety and your burdens to the one who already knows the weight you are carrying, the one who wants to walk alongside you to share the load. As Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and you will find rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." If we can do that, then we too will be able to claim that our faith has rescued us. May it be so.